That morning, nobody knew the engine was designed to fail. September 15th, 1943. The B-17 Flying Fortress cut through European skies that carried the smoke of burning cities and the thunder of Allied bombing raids. 8 pilots from the 8th Air Force received orders that bore no official Army Air Forces seal. Orders to investigate reports of German aircraft parts hidden in Allied supply depots. Orders that came with aircraft components that didn't match regulation specifications and maintenance manuals that showed procedures not approved by any right field engineering documentation, flying toward targets through airspace that had been secured by American bombing campaigns, carrying equipment that felt different from standard issue, toward coordinates that appeared on no operational maps approved by General Carl Spaatz. The mission briefing had lasted exactly 14 minutes. Locate suspected German aircraft components smuggled into Allied maintenance facilities. Secure enemy aviation technology for reverse engineering. Test captured German aircraft parts against American production standards. Standard intelligence operations for an air force fighting to establish aerial supremacy over Nazi Germany. Except nothing about this mission was standard, starting with the fact that their target coordinates were at Allied airfields that had been under American control for months, not recently captured German installations. Captain First Class Michael Patrick Sullivan checked his instruments and studied the navigation charts ahead. Irish immigrant from New York who had joined the Army Air Forces to fight Nazi tyranny and defend democratic aviation. Expert in aircraft maintenance and flight engineering, from years working at civilian airports, had volunteered for this assignment because he believed the intelligence reports about German aircraft technology, because he trusted his commanding officers to provide accurate information about enemy capabilities, because he thought classified missions were classified to protect Allied operational security, not to hide activities that would disgrace people who had never climbed into a cockpit or faced German fighter planes. First Lieutenant Anthony Joseph Romano carried the aircraft analysis equipment that had been modified with testing instruments he didn't recognize. Italian immigrant from California who spoke fluent German and understood aeronautical engineering had enlisted to fight fascist aviation after witnessing Nazi aircraft bomb his relatives in Italy, wanted to establish Allied air superiority and prove that democratic aviation could defeat totalitarian aircraft production, had no idea that defeating German aviation sometimes required activities that were indistinguishable from the industrial collaboration they were fighting to prevent. That fighting Nazi aircraft production sometimes meant discovering Nazi collaboration among those claiming to oppose it. The aircraft manufacturing facility appeared through morning clouds like something that didn't belong in Allied-controlled territory. Not the crude German aircraft repair installations that characterized most Luftwaffe logistics operations behind enemy lines. This was sophisticated aviation infrastructure, modern aircraft production facilities designed for constructing fighter planes and bombers, railroad connections that led to Allied supply networks rather than German military installations. And most disturbing of all, smokestacks that were producing aircraft components, despite reports that claimed all German aviation production in the region had been eliminated by Allied bombing campaigns. Second Lieutenant James Edward Murphy raised his field glasses and studied the facility. Farm boy from Kansas, who had grown up around aircraft engines and understood aviation mechanics. Expert pilot, who could identify military aircraft from civilian aviation installations. Natural reconnaissance specialist, who could distinguish enemy facilities from friendly installations. But nothing in his training had prepared him for what he was seeing through those field glasses. Buildings that were clearly designed for aircraft production and aviation component manufacturing. Equipment that belonged in American aircraft factories, not German military installations. and workers moving between
The
buildings
shipment.
who
Where is
weren't
it?
wearing
I
German
don't know what you're talking
uniforms,
about. The
weren't
one from
wearing
German
American
soil. Tell us now.
uniforms, were wearing civilian clothes that looked distinctly American. Flight Officer William Francis O'Brien carried the explosives that were supposed to destroy German aircraft stockpiles. Irish American from Massachusetts, who had lost relatives to German submarine attacks on Allied shipping, had volunteered for dangerous missions because he believed eliminating German aviation capabilities would shorten the war and save Allied lives, because he trusted that American aviation forces were fighting for freedom and democracy, because he thought the explosives he carried would be used to eliminate aircraft that threatened Allied air operations, not to destroy evidence of activities that American officials couldn't afford to acknowledge. The aviation facility was operational, not abandoned by withdrawing German forces, not captured by advancing Allied armies, not destroyed by bombing raids that intelligence claimed had eliminated all German aircraft production capabilities in the region. Operational, and apparently manufacturing aircraft components that required sophisticated equipment, skilled technicians, and ongoing aviation logistics. Activities that someone was willing to risk 8 American pilot lives to investigate, or eliminate, or cover up. Technical Sergeant Robert Thomas Anderson was the unit specialist in aircraft engineering and aviation documentation. German-American from Wisconsin, who had joined the Army Air Forces to fight against Nazi aviation and prove his American loyalty. Expert in aircraft design and aviation manufacturing analysis, could examine aircraft specifications and identify discrepancies in aviation engineering. Had joined this mission to ensure that captured German aircraft technology was properly analyzed for Allied aviation improvements. Had no idea that proper analysis sometimes revealed improper activities, that fighting for American aviation superiority sometimes meant discovering Americans who were betraying those principles for commercial advantage. Staff Sergeant Alexander Hamilton Rodriguez handled communications and aviation industry analysis. Mexican-American from Texas, who had joined the Army Air Forces to prove his American aviation loyalty. Expert in aircraft logistics and aviation finance, could operate radio equipment under combat conditions, could analyze commercial aviation records, and identify suspicious manufacturing activities. But the records he was analyzing weren't German aircraft documents, were American aviation manufacturing ledgers, were industrial communications discussing American aircraft production activities at what was supposed to be a German aviation facility. Sergeant David Washington Brown tested the aircraft equipment that had been provided for the mission. African-American pilot from Alabama who had enlisted to fight for aviation freedom and prove his flying abilities. Expert in aircraft maintenance and aviation systems analysis, could identify defective aircraft components and faulty aviation manufacturing, but the equipment he was testing wasn't protecting Allied aviation forces from German aircraft, was exposing American pilots to systematic sabotage that was designed to cause American aircraft to fail during combat with German aviation forces. Sullivan signaled for his team to observe the manufacturing facility from concealed positions. 20-year aviation veteran who had flown civilian aircraft since before the war, had seen action against Japanese aircraft in the Pacific Theater, understood that aviation warfare required difficult decisions and dangerous intelligence operations, but also understood that some activities crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, that some orders required questioning, even when questioning orders could be considered mutiny against American aviation authority, that some missions revealed truths that were more dangerous than German aircraft. The manufacturing facility contained aircraft that didn't match any known German or captured Allied aviation designs, didn't match Luftwaffe specifications that American aviation intelligence had documented, matched American aircraft manufacturing patterns, matched aviation production techniques, matched aircraft component specifications that were identical to parts that American factories produced for the United States Army Air Forces, matched the kind of components that American manufacturers created under aviation contracts with both American and German industrial authorities. Through field glasses, the pilots could see technicians working on aircraft wearing American aviation clothing and using American aircraft manufacturing techniques, could see trucks arriving with materials that bore American aviation contractor markings, could see finished aircraft components being loaded onto transport vehicles that were designed for both Allied and German aviation specifications, could see aviation equipment that was identical to systems used by American aircraft contractors and manufacturers, could see evidence that proved this facility was American, not German. Romano intercepted radio communications that confirmed their worst suspicions. Conversations in American accents between aviation personnel who were discussing aircraft specifications, delivery schedules, and payment arrangements, not military communications about supporting German aviation operations, commercial communications about aircraft manufacturing, about aviation production operations that were producing inferior aircraft components for Allied air forces while simultaneously manufacturing superior parts for German buyers, about activities that violated every principle of American aviation independence while generating substantial profits for American manufacturers. Murphy discovered that the aircraft components being manufactured contained engineering defects that were deliberately designed below aviation combat specifications. Engine parts that were inadequately constructed and would fail during extended flight operations. Wing assemblies that were improperly reinforced and would break under combat stress. Navigation systems that would malfunction when American aircraft needed maximum performance during battles with German aviation forces. Manufacturing defects that weren't accidents or quality control failures, were systematic sabotage designed to ensure Allied aviation defeat while maintaining plausible deniability for American manufacturers who were profiting from both sides of the war. O'Brien used his aviation engineering knowledge to examine the facility's production methods and saw something that changed everything: manufacturing equipment that was identical to machinery used in American aircraft factories, production techniques that were standard in American aviation manufacturing, quality control procedures that were being deliberately subverted to produce defective components for Allied air forces, while maintaining superior standards for parts destined for German aviation service, evidence that proved American manufacturers were sabotaging American aviation effectiveness while claiming to support American air superiority. Anderson realized that the American aircraft they were supposed to be flying were being shot down by German planes, equipped with components manufactured in American factories by American workers under contracts with American companies who were being paid by the American government, components that were designed to fail when American aviation supremacy depended on their reliability, aircraft that were constructed to break under combat stress, planes that were systematically sabotaged to ensure German aviation superiority, commercial betrayal that was generating profits while killing American pilots. Rodriguez examined the commercial documentation and recognized business procedures that were identical to systems used by American aviation companies and aircraft contractors, logistics that were designed for supplying both American and German aviation forces from the same manufacturing facilities, transportation networks that were moving superior aircraft components to German air forces while delivering defective parts to Allied aviation squadrons, commercial operations that were prolonging the war to maximize profits from both governments. Brown analyzed the aviation component samples and identified systematic use of inferior materials that would reduce aircraft effectiveness by approximately 60%, engine components that had been constructed with alloys that would fail under combat stress, electrical systems that had been deliberately weakened through improper manufacturing, aviation fuel systems that were designed to malfunction during critical flight operations, manufacturing materials that were designed to fail during the most critical moments of aerial combat, quality control that was ensuring Allied aviation defeat, while providing German forces with reliable aircraft that would give them decisive advantages in aerial warfare. The pilots realized they weren't investigating German aircraft operations. They were witnessing American commercial activities that were using World War II as an opportunity to generate profits by sabotaging Allied aviation effectiveness, while simultaneously supplying German forces with superior aircraft components. Activities that were extending the war, increasing Allied pilot casualties, and serving German aviation interests rather than American air superiority. At 14:23 hours, facility security personnel discovered the American aviation observation positions. Security personnel, who weren't German Luftwaffe officers or Nazi aviation technicians, were American private guards employed by American aircraft manufacturing companies who had orders to eliminate anyone who approached the facility without proper commercial authorization, who had been told that any aviation personnel in the area were German infiltrators attempting to steal American aircraft trade secrets, who had been given permission to use lethal force against American pilots to protect American commercial activities that couldn't be acknowledged without destroying American aviation credibility. The firefight began with automatic weapons, fire from positions that had been prepared specifically to eliminate aviation reconnaissance. Thompson's submachine guns, operated by personnel who had been trained to counter American pilot tactics. Personnel who knew exactly how American aviators operated and exactly how to neutralize their capabilities. Personnel who were killing American aviation forces to protect American business interests that were generating American profits while sabotaging American air superiority. Sullivan ordered his team to take cover while returning fire with .45 caliber pistols and carbines that jammed more frequently than regulation weapons should. Weapons that had been manufactured by the same contractors who were supplying the facility. Weapons that had been deliberately sabotaged to fail during combat. Fighting American guards who were using superior firearms to eliminate American pilots who had discovered American activities that were officially denied. Romano used his knowledge of Italian mountain warfare to outflank security positions that had been designed to counter German forces, not American aviators who understood Mediterranean combat techniques. Eliminated several guards who were carrying identification that proved they were American citizens employed by American aircraft manufacturing companies that held American government contracts for producing aviation components. Murphy used his marksmanship training to eliminate facility personnel who were attempting to signal for reinforcements that would overwhelm the reconnaissance team. Personnel who were using American aviation communication systems to contact American manufacturing executives who would respond with additional guards, and possibly American aviation forces who would be told they were eliminating German infiltrators rather than American pilots who had discovered American aviation crimes. O'Brien used his demolition expertise to destroy aircraft manufacturing equipment that was being used to produce defective components for Allied air forces, not to eliminate German aviation capabilities, but to prevent American sabotage of American aviation effectiveness. Explosions that eliminated production machinery, destroyed quality control records, and killed witnesses who could have testified about activities that were funded by American taxpayers, but served German interests rather than American air superiority. Anderson used his documentation skills to gather evidence of American aviation sabotage, while using his access to destroy commercial records that documented systematic betrayal of American aviation interests. Evidence gathering that preserved proof of American manufacturing crimes while preventing American companies from completing contracts that would have been profitable but would have ensured Allied aviation defeat through systematic aircraft failures. Rodriguez used his communication expertise to intercept and disrupt facility radio traffic that was attempting to coordinate the elimination of American pilots who had become inconvenient witnesses to American commercial activities. Communications that proved American manufacturing executives knew about the sabotage operation, approved of the production practices, and authorized the elimination of American aviation personnel who discovered what was being conducted in America's name. Brown used his aviation expertise to analyze and document systematic sabotage while destroying production samples that would have been used to continue manufacturing defective components for Allied air forces. Analysis that proved American manufacturers were deliberately weakening American aviation effectiveness while simultaneously providing German forces with superior aircraft components that would ensure Allied aviation defeat. The pilots extracted evidence of American aviation sabotage while fighting their way out of the facility against American security guards who had superior weapons and better defensive positions. Evidence that proved American manufacturers were sabotaging American aviation effectiveness while simultaneously supplying German forces with superior aircraft components. Evidence that documented the use of American aviation contracts to fund activities that served German aviation interests rather than American air superiority. But extraction required crossing territory that was controlled by American aviation forces, who had been told they were searching for German infiltrators. Forces that had orders to eliminate the reconnaissance team to prevent exposure of activities that could embarrass American manufacturing leadership and destroy American public support for aviation warfare. Forces that were willing to kill American pilots to protect American business executives who had never faced enemy fire or risked their lives for anything except commercial advantage. The pursuit began when American anti-aircraft artillery began shelling coordinates that were transmitted by facility personnel who survived the pilot assault. Artillery bombardment that was officially attributed to counter-battery fire against German positions, but was actually designed to eliminate American personnel who possessed evidence of American commercial crimes. Bombardment conducted by American aviation officers who believed they were supporting American pilot operations, but were actually participating in the elimination of American witnesses to American manufacturing activities. Sullivan led his team through hostile territory that had been mapped by American aviation surveyors, who provided the information to American forces that were pursuing American pilots. Maps that showed every possible escape route, every potential hiding place, every source of fuel and shelter in the contested airspace. Maps that gave pursuing forces decisive advantages against aviators who were trying to reach friendly airfields while carrying evidence that could expose American manufacturing crimes. Romano used his language skills to communicate with Italian resistance fighters who were operating in the region, convincing them that American pilots were carrying information that could expose American activities that violated the principles they had enlisted to defend. Information that Italian-American aviation personnel could use to embarrass American leadership that was tolerating manufacturing activities that were betraying the aviation independence cause they had joined America to support. Murphy maintained communication with aviation headquarters, providing false information about their location and status to prevent American forces from intercepting evidence of American aviation sabotage. Communication that required deceiving American aviation commanders who were participating in the elimination operation without understanding what they were eliminating. Communication that served American air superiority by opposing American manufacturers who were betraying American aviation interests. O'Brien used his demolition skills to create obstacles that delayed American forces pursuing the reconnaissance team. Obstacles that served American air superiority by opposing American commercial interests that were serving German aviation interests. Obstacles that protected American pilots from American forces who had been ordered to kill American pilots to protect American manufacturers who were ensuring Allied aviation defeat through systematic aircraft sabotage. Anderson used his documentation expertise to preserve evidence while treating wounded civilians who were caught in crossfire between American pilots and American forces pursuing them. Documentation that served historical truth while complicating aviation operations. Evidence preservation that demonstrated American principles while exposing American manufacturing crimes committed by Americans who claimed to be serving American aviation interests. Rodriguez used his aviation industry analysis skills to intercept American communications about the pursuit operation. Learning that American forces had been told they were chasing German agents who possessed classified information about American aviation capabilities. Forces that didn't know they were pursuing American pilots. Forces that had been lied to by American officials who were using American aviation personnel to eliminate American evidence of American manufacturing crimes. Brown helped preserve aviation component samples while evacuating American factory workers who had witnessed the systematic sabotage and possessed first-hand knowledge of American manufacturing betrayal. Preservation that provided evidence while complicating escape operations. Evidence that demonstrated the scope of manufacturing crimes while endangering American personnel who were trying to expose those crimes. The chase continued for 6 days across contested European airspace, where American and German aviation forces were fighting major aerial battles. Airspace where American pilots were being pursued by American forces, while German aircraft were conducting bombing raids on Allied positions. Battlefield where the evidence they carried could change the outcome of the war by exposing the American manufacturing conspiracy that was ensuring German aviation victory through systematic sabotage of Allied aircraft effectiveness. Evidence carried by the pilots proved that American manufacturers were systematically sabotaging Allied aviation effectiveness, while simultaneously supplying German forces with superior aircraft components and aviation equipment. Sabotage that was generating substantial profits by selling parts to both sides, while ensuring that Allied air forces received defective components that would fail during combat. Commercial betrayal that was prolonging the war, increasing Allied pilot casualties, and serving German aviation interests rather than American air superiority. The sabotage operation was part of a larger network that supplied aviation components to both Allied and German forces, while ensuring that Allied aviation forces could not achieve decisive victory against professional German air forces. Commercial interests that profited from prolonged aerial conflict rather than from Allied or German aviation success. Manufacturing companies that were owned by American investors who were generating profits from both governments, while ensuring that the war would continue long enough to maximize their returns on aviation production contracts. But the evidence also revealed that American manufacturers planned to expand the sabotage operations to include systematic elimination of American aviation commanders who were too effective at fighting German air forces. Commanders whose success threatened to achieve Allied air superiority too quickly for commercial interests that required prolonged aerial conflict to maximize profits from aircraft production for both sides. American aviation officers who were being targeted for elimination by American agents who were disguising assassinations as German air action. The pilots reached German territory on September 21, 1943, after evading American forces for 6 days, while protecting evidence that documented systematic American manufacturing sabotage of Allied aviation effectiveness, evidence that was immediately classified by German aviation authorities, who understood that exposing American manufacturing activities would validate German claims about Allied aviation corruption, while potentially ending the profitable aircraft production trade that was ensuring German air superiority. The reconnaissance team was officially declared missing in action, presumed shot down by German aircraft, while conducting operations behind enemy lines during major aerial battles over occupied Europe. Their families were told they had died heroically serving American air superiority in the struggle against Nazi aviation tyranny. Their sacrifice was used to justify increased aviation spending and expanded aircraft production contracts with the same American companies who had been sabotaging Allied aviation effectiveness. But they didn't die over Europe. They lived as German aviation prisoners who possessed evidence that could embarrass Allied leadership while potentially ending the war through exposure of American manufacturing corruption. Prisoners who were protected by German aviation intelligence services that understood the value of evidence that could undermine Allied public support for aviation warfare, while revealing the commercial interests that were ensuring German air superiority through systematic sabotage. The aviation sabotage operation continued using different personnel and different security measures. The commercial activities continued using different manufacturing facilities and different cover stories. The profit generation continued using different methods and different justifications. American manufacturing crimes continued because American manufacturing criminals were never prosecuted, because American evidence was classified by American officials, because American witnesses were eliminated by American forces. This story ends here. But the sabotage doesn't end. It continues in factories that produce aircraft components for opposing sides of every aviation conflict, conducted by manufacturers who profit from prolonged aerial wars rather than from decisive air victories, funded by government contracts that serve commercial interests rather than aviation objectives, supervised by officials who serve manufacturing shareholders rather than air superiority interests, justified by patriotism that actually serves profit margins rather than national aviation principles. 8 pilots learned that the greatest threat to American air superiority comes from Americans who profit from preventing Allied aviation victory, that the most effective way to destroy American aviation principles is to claim you're defending them while systematically ensuring their defeat through aircraft sabotage, that the only way to serve American air superiority is to oppose Americans who have captured American aviation institutions and use them to serve German interests through commercial betrayal. World War II became a business model for activities that had nothing to do with American air superiority or German aviation supremacy. Operations that were designed to generate profits for American manufacturers rather than to achieve Allied aviation objectives. Operations that prolonged the aerial conflict and increased pilot casualties because ending the aviation war would end the commercial opportunities that made the conflict valuable to people who viewed Allied aviation defeat as business opportunity. The evidence preserved by 8 pilots documented American manufacturing activities that influenced the duration and outcome of World War II. Activities that were expanded as aviation spending increased. Activities that were refined through technological innovation. Activities that were legitimized through legal frameworks that made aviation war profiteering legal when conducted by American companies against Allied aviation interests. Activities that were eventually used in subsequent American aviation conflicts, where similar patterns of aircraft sabotage and commercial exploitation prolonged aerial wars for profit. Some truths are too profitable for American manufacturers to acknowledge, too expensive for American officials to admit, too revealing for American institutions to declassify, too honest for American systems that depend on aviation war profiteering for aerospace commercial revenue. This is one of them. The truth that American pilots died not to achieve Allied air superiority over German aviation tyranny, but to protect American manufacturers from Allied aviation victory that would have ended their profitable relationships with German aviation and commercial interests. The aerial war continues in factories that serve American commercial interests rather than American pilots, fought by contractors who profit from aviation conflict rather than seeking Allied air victory, funded by American taxpayers who don't know their money, serves German interests through American manufacturing betrayal, supervised by American officials who serve American manufacturers rather than American air superiority, justified by American aviation patriotism that actually serves American commercial profits derived from ensuring Allied aviation defeat. This story is classified, will remain classified, will be denied if discovered, will be attributed to German propaganda if published, will be used to justify expanded manufacturing operations if investigated, because acknowledging the truth would require admitting that Allied air superiority was sabotaged by American manufacturers who profited from ensuring Allied aviation defeat, that American aviation effectiveness served German objectives through American commercial betrayal rather than Allied air superiority through American aviation victory. The European skies keep their secrets. The evidence remains hidden in archives controlled by German aviation intelligence services that became American aerospace historical societies after the war. The truth survives in fragments, protected by people who could never return to American aviation service without acknowledging their role in preserving evidence of American manufacturing betrayal. Justice waits for aviation authorities who will never be granted authority to prosecute American manufacturers who ensured German air superiority through systematic aircraft sabotage. 8 pilots learned that serving Allied air superiority requires discovering that American aviation agencies serve American manufacturers rather than Allied air superiority, that American aviation freedom costs more than Americans can afford because the price includes accepting systematic betrayal by Americans who profit from Allied aviation defeat, that American aviation principles require eliminating American manufacturers who profit from violating Allied aviation principles through systematic aircraft sabotage, that the only way to protect Allied air superiority is to protect it from American manufacturers who view aviation independence as an obstacle to profitable relationships with German aviation and commercial interests. The manufacturing facility was destroyed. The evidence was buried. The witnesses were eliminated. But the system that created the facility, buried the evidence, and eliminated the witnesses continues to operate, continues to use American aviation resources to conduct activities that serve German interests through American manufacturing betrayal, continues to sacrifice American pilots to protect American commercial activities that violate Allied air superiority, continues to betray American aviation principles while claiming to serve them through systematic sabotage disguised as patriotic manufacturing. World War II became the template for commercial activities that had nothing to do with Allied air superiority and everything to do with manufacturing profiteering. Air superiority that was sabotaged to create commercial opportunities for American manufacturers who sold aircraft to both sides while ensuring that Allied aviation forces received defective components. Aviation victory that was prevented to maximize profits from aircraft production contracts that served German interests rather than Allied objectives. Aviation freedom that was betrayed because achieving air superiority would end the business relationships that made the aerial war profitable for manufacturers who had never climbed into cockpits or faced German fighter planes. And somewhere in the archives of aerospace historical societies that were founded by families whose wealth was built on World War II aviation profiteering, evidence continues to exist that could expose the American manufacturing conspiracy that prolonged America's fight for air superiority. Evidence that proves World War II was extended by American manufacturers who sabotaged Allied aviation effectiveness while supplying German forces with superior aircraft components. Evidence that documents the conversion of American aviation patriotism into commercial profit margins. Evidence that reveals the transformation of the struggle for Allied air superiority into opportunities for American manufacturing enrichment through systematic betrayal of the aviation cause they claimed to support.